This is my 2008 Legacy GT that I've had for about 5 years. It's similar to a WRX and has the same engine, but is generally more comfortable. This one has an intake, exhaust, and a tune, making about 280 wheel horsepower and 350 wheel torque, and happens to sound pretty good. I've been through a lot with this car. It's seen mostly daily driving with occasional track events, as well as some close calls. Thankfully, it's escaped damage aside from some minor mechanical failures. Point is, I like this car and I'll do what I can to keep it on the road. This all brings us to today. The car is down on power, but I hadn't thought much of it until I realized the car was starting to smoke out the exhaust. At this point, I realized it wasn't just a boost leak like I had thought. I stopped driving the car and began doing a compression test, fearing the worst. I started out with cylinder number 4, which apparently is the one that fails the most often. I had only taken the intercooler off, and I'd already noticed a lot of oil inside the intake tract. This is a symptom of blown ringlands, which lets compression pass the rings into the crankcase. This then blows more oil into the intake tract, causing smoke on startup. The plug itself looked fine, but I hooked up my compression tester after finally getting access to the cylinder. I tried figuring out why the car wouldn't crank, but then I remembered I had to press the clutch in. After a few cranks, I read about 120 psi in cylinder 4, which isn't too bad. Now, I have a compression tester, so I figured I might as well use it. I set the piston in the top dead center on compression stroke and applied pressure. The gauge on the left is input pressure, and the gauge on your right is how much pressure the cylinder is holding. Ideally, the cylinder doesn't leak at all, and it reads the same as the applied pressure. Cylinder 4 looked pretty good, holding about 93% of the pressure. The spark plugs are really hard to get out on this engine, and I already had the right bank available, so I tried cylinder 2 next. This cylinder was barely holding any pressure at all. Something wasn't right. If the piston isn't at top dead center and the valve is open, it could give you a false leak reading, so I double checked everything. Sure enough, the cylinder was still leaking almost all of the pressure. I heard it coming out of the intake tract at first, which made me think it was an intake valve that was the problem. However, the intercooler was disconnected, so there was no path from the intake valve to the intake tract. When I took the oil filler cap off, I could hear pressure escaping much more clearly.
Feel the air coming out of the oil filler cap.
This pressure was escaping through a vacuum line into the intake boot, which made me think it was an intake valve at first. In reality, the piston ringlands are clearly damaged in the cylinder. It's actually a wonder the car has kept running for so long. I put everything back together and backed the car out so I could do what had to be done, which is make space in the garage by moving my actual project car. This is my 2001 BMW 330ci that I'm building into a track car. Thankfully, it does run and drive, so I was able to back it out. After restarting it anyways. I think it's low on gas because it keeps evaporating from the fuel cell. This was actually my first time driving the BMW since I rebuilt just about everything on it. Anyways, you should check out my channel for more videos on this car because I've got a whole build series going on. Unfortunately, it's getting displaced to work on fixing my daily driver. I'm going to try to finish this up as soon as possible. I still got parts that are going to take a while to arrive at the BMW anyways. I thought about it quite a bit, and I think the best course of action is a full engine rebuild. And not just a rebuild, an upgrade. These EJ25 motors are fairly capable to a point, and it wouldn't hurt to do things right, but also squeeze a little bit more out of it. I want to keep everything reliable, so it'll be overbuilt. I still think I can get a wheel horsepower in the mid-300s fairly conservatively without having to dump massive amounts of money into the surrounding systems. Anyways, I don't know anything for sure until I figure out the extent of the damage by taking the engine out and tearing it down. So stay tuned for the next video where I pull out the engine. As always, thanks for watching and feel free to like and subscribe.